A humanoid robot will perform every action as well as it can perform it every single time. It will not be distracted. It won't have a bad day. It will not come in hungover or ill. When we're talking about the disruption of labor, we are talking about one of the most profound transformations of human civilization in history. There's no question about that. It's right up there with fire and the wheel and electricity and writing. So this is an absolutely extraordinary moment.
Over the next 15 to 20 years, humanoid robots will disrupt human labor throughout hundreds of industries across every major sector of the global economy. This disruption of labor will be among the most profound transformations in human history, and from this will arise both the greatest opportunities and the greatest challenges our civilization has ever faced. This paragraph came from the most recent groundbreaking research from ReThinkX, an independent research organization run by Tony Seba and James Arbib. Today, we'll meet Adam Dorr. Adam is the Director of Research at ReThinkX. Over the last 5 years, they've published landmark research about the disruption of energy, transportation, and food by new technologies, and now robots. Thank you so much, Adam. Thanks for joining me once again.
Hey, Edward, thanks for having me here.
So this is a very big deal. We were just talking about it, that this is the single largest disruption. You guys are the experts. You guys are the research group that everybody's been focused on. You've called so many things right. And now you drop this. We've been anxiously waiting for your research, and this is a big one. You went and examined quite a number of insights that you put together. Let's just show quickly this thing that you just dropped on Monday. This time, we are the horses. The disruption of labor by humanoid robots. As we move through this, you want to give a little bit of an introduction?
Oh, absolutely. So, as you said, our previous research has focused on three foundational disruptions: the disruption of energy, of transportation, and of food. As if one of those, any one of those, wasn't a big enough deal in itself, right? The disruption of energy. It's Energy goes into everything in our lives. It's absolutely foundational, and it's going to be transformed totally over the next 15 to 20 years by solar, wind, batteries, heat pumps, new technologies. The same is true in transportation. The transportation sector is foundational. It's going to be transformed by electric vehicles, by autonomy, and so on. Same in food. Food is going to be transformed by precision fermentation, cellular agriculture, and related technologies. Now, in addition to those three foundational sectors, we add a fourth into the mix: the disruption of labor, which is arguably the most foundational of all. It was Adam Smith who said that the real value of everything is the labor that goes into it. And there's no link in any supply chain, in any industry that produces any good or service that doesn't have labor somewhere along the line as an input. It goes into absolutely everything. And so when we're talking about the disruption of labor, we are talking about one of the most profound transformations of human civilization in history. There's no question about that. It's right up there with fire and the wheel and electricity and writing. So this is an absolutely extraordinary moment. And as I said, if it would be extraordinary enough if even just one of those sectors had been disrupted in the same way that over the last 30 years, we've already seen information, another foundational sector, disrupted by the internet and computing technologies. We've lived through that recently. That has been a radical transformation of the human condition and of the global economy. The world before the internet, very different than the world after the internet. Now, we've got not one, not two, four more simultaneously, and AI and robotics are driving the disruption of labor. You could argue this is the big one, but really these four are they function as a system that works together. Each of them is going to accelerate the others. The disruption of energy accelerates the disruption of transportation. Those two accelerate the disruption of food. Those three accelerate the disruption of robotics, and robotics accelerates the disruption of all the others. It is, frankly, it's a pretty insane time to be alive, honestly. And I struggle to put into words how radical this situation is. It is truly profound.
I love it. You're doing a great job doing that. You're very articulate. I mean, you just said it. You got me laughing, smiling because you said, right, this is bigger than, maybe fire and anything else. I mean, it could be that big. So the thing about you guys, right, is that, Tony Seba, ReThinkX, and you've been doing research on this, and a lot of the things, almost everything, honestly, that Tony was, talking about for years has come true. He's been very, very accurate, and it's only like you guys must be so like ecstatic now because you're seeing everything you've said come together. So let's share this photo here, which is something that Tony has done many times before. Let's go ahead and get you to explain what we're looking at here.
Well, what we're seeing there is that it's a before and after. And in the first photograph, we see that this is Fifth Avenue. This is the Easter Day Parade, and there's only one car, one combustion engine vehicle amidst
Yeah,
a crowd of horse-drawn carriages in the first picture,
yeah,
the before. And then the
yeah.
after picture is only 13 years later, and the situation is the reverse. The situation is
Wow.
exactly opposite. There's one horse left in a crowd of cars. And and again, remember, we used horses for thousands of years. They were absolutely foundational to mobility, to transportation. They were how things moved for centuries. And it didn't take 50 or 100 years or multiple generations
Mhm.
for our transportation system to be disrupted. So that's the lesson of that stark before and after picture, is that even foundational sectors, even huge industries, even titanic incumbent interests can be disrupted, and very, very swiftly. Typically, when we look at the data, we see disruption happen within 20 years. And over the course of human history, it's gotten faster. We often see 10 to 15 years. That seems to be where the majority of historical disruptions sort of fall in the 10 to 15-year range. And then there's some that are longer, and some that are even a bit faster than that. But overall, there is a general acceleration too. Disruption just happens faster in the 21st century than it did in the 18th century. And probably that's not a surprise either. Everything in life is moving faster now. But the upshot here, the takeaway message from those two images that Tony is so famous for showing, he's often copied in that, by the way. Many
Mhm.
people use that same example, and we've documented more than 100 other cases of disruption quantitatively, and there are nearly 1,000 cases of technological transformation that we've seen
Mhm.
throughout history that all follow that same pattern. It doesn't take decades and decades and decades for a market or an industry or an entire sector to be disrupted. It can happen very, very quickly, and that's what we're going to see again, and not in just one foundational sector, but four of them simultaneously. Right? Energy, transportation, food, and labor. So that's what to expect. Looking at the data, and the reason why Tony and our team have been accurate in the past in making predictions is because we're doing it with a robust theoretical framework that is validated by a very large corpus of historical data. And
Mhm.
we these are patterns. These are system dynamics that drive behavior and drive that drive the same pattern of dynamics again and again and again. And so we see it for industries of all kinds. We see it for products of all kinds. What this means, the upshot, is that the onus is on anybody who would say it's going to be different this time. Energy, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. Unlike the 100 other times we've seen throughout history, this time
Yeah.
energy is going to be an exception, and it's going to take 50 or 100 years before
Yeah.
solar and wind and batteries disrupt fossil fuels. Or this time it's going to be different for transportation. It isn't going to be 15 or 20 years for electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles to disrupt the existing transportation system based on privately owned, manually driven combustion engine vehicles. No, no, no. It's going to take 100 years, and it's going to be an exception this time. That's not the right way to think about it. And it will be the same with robotics. It will be exactly the same. There's no reason to expect anything special or exceptional or different about the disruption of labor than the more than 100 other examples that we've seen historically. The dynamics remain the same. The dynamics remain the same. New technology comes along, it outcompetes the existing technology on price and performance. There's a cost capability that improves over time. And when you're facing an overwhelming competitor, the logic of value maximization just takes hold. And it really is that powerful and that fundamental. So we believe very strongly that once the disruption gets going, we have every reason to expect about a 15-year time horizon to go from the standard sort of 10% of the market to 80 to 90% of the market. And it will and the market will grow in the meantime. This is a pattern that we always see. The new system that's created by a new technology tends to be larger than the system it replaces because the new technology is more capable, offers more possibilities, and therefore it supports a larger range of activity. Translates into a larger system, a larger market, more industries, bigger industries, and so forth. So these are the fundamental dynamics of disruption that we have seen so many times in the past, and we should expect to see this time
Okay.
with AI and robotics.
I don't know, Adam. I think this time it might be different. But what I
Well,
mean this
hey,
time, though,
if you can convince me with data and
I
logic,
let me
then go
convince
for
you.
it.
Okay, you'll like this. No, I laugh a little bit because it is challenging. I'm sure you even more so when somebody comes and says to you, "Not in my lifetime, never in my lifetime," and then they'll say, "Oh, sure, sure," but 10 years, 15 years from now. But actually, it happens much faster than you realize. And I know you're saying that people usually take the short term versus long term. You'll tell me more about that. But the reason why I think this time might actually happen faster is because of actually not slower, but faster, is because of this photo that you shared here. You know, here's a factory in 2025. Humans have to kind of create these bots and put them together. Certainly, there's lots of industrial robots that's helping it, but it's still a factory is at least 50% humans and 50% industrial robots. But in a factory in 2040, it's going to be all bots. So what's unique about this time is that the humanoid bot product is actually going to make humanoid bots themselves too. It's actually unsure yet if humanoid bots is actually going to create the human bots because you can still use industrial automation to do this. So let's go
Well,
through
it'll
your,
certainly be a
you know,
combination. It'll certainly be a
yeah.
combination. But I think you put your finger right on a very important point, and I'm sure we'll get to it. It's one of the key insights that we laid out, and
Mm,
that is there is an extraordinary opportunity for autocatalysis here, for
okay, that's what it is.
self-acceleration, to
Gotcha.
close the loop, so that very early in the disruption, the new technologies are accelerating themselves. Now, we will see this in energy. We've seen it in other domains in the past. In energy, a quick
Mhm.
example that's quite intuitive is, well, once you start making solar panels and wind turbines, the electricity they generate can help run the factories
I
in which
see.
you make
Okay.
solar panels and wind turbines. So that's another example of kind of closing that loop. But the degree to which that is possible with robotics is extraordinary. It's really quite extraordinary,
Gotcha.
um, and it
Okay.
has to do with the special nature of disrupting labor itself. So I agree. This could go even faster than we might otherwise expect from the history of already extremely fast disruptions.
Yeah. I appreciate you telling me about autocatalysis. That was one word in one of your insights. We'll go there. I didn't I didn't understand it until you just explained it now. Thank you for that. That's a very powerful principle to think about. So let's go through your insights. You've got 15 of them, and I categorize them, I think it's just the way you guys obviously laid it out in logical segments. So the first one is insight one, the humanoid robot labor disruption is inevitable. The disruption will create an entirely new labor system, and the disruption of labor is about tasks, not jobs. Do you want to address these?
Absolutely. So the most insight number one, the most fundamental point to take on board is that this is going to happen. It's inevitable. There's no circumventing it. There's no preventing it. There's no denying it. This is an inevitability. And it's fundamentally driven by economics, and that is the incentive to economize on value is one of the most powerful organizing forces in human society and civilization. And so the same forces that have driven the competitiveness and therefore the adoption of new technology in the past and the corresponding abandonment of older technology, which has led to collapse of the industries that made it and utilized it, um, all of that applies in spades to robots disrupting human labor. And it's very easy to see with just conservative estimates on the numbers how robots, uh, humanoid robotics, can offer value in the form of labor that is economically overwhelmingly competitive compared to humans. And this is simply going to be a fact of life, a fact. It's just going to be reality. There's no denying it. So that is the most important thing. If you forget all of the other detail and all of the other insights that follow, that's the one to remember. This is not a fanciful notion. This is not something that lies far off in the distant future. It's not something that we could choose to do or not do. It is inevitable at this point. And the rest flows from that first point. The second and the third key insights are about understanding the nature, the sort of the core nature of the disruption. So this disruption is it's a foundational one. We're not talking about a specific product being disrupted. We're not talking about one type of light bulb being replaced by a different, being substituted by a different type of light bulb. We're not talking about just one industry that's going to be affected because there's a new range of products built on a technology that's on offer. It's not going to be like digital cameras disrupting celluloid film. This is a phase change disruption at the scale of an entire sector of the economy. And because of that, we are going to see an entirely new system emerge around how productive work is accomplished, how work gets done. And that is an absolutely profound transformation, absolutely profound. So it's a really, really big deal. The third insight that you mentioned is about the unit of analysis. So when we think scientifically about any phenomena, one of the most important things to establish is what is your unit of analysis? What are you looking at? What are you observing? What are you measuring? How are you establishing metrics on that and measures on that observation, and so on? So this is really about it's sort of the simplest, most basic, most elemental way to think about a metric for this particular disruption. And what we've seen in the past, what the history of disruption tells us, is that new technologies obviate, they make obsolete old metrics and measures, and they require new ones. So, take an example I mentioned. For celluloid film, like the one of the metrics that you might use if you were understanding celluloid film was how many individual frames of film are on a roll of film, and how many can you take with a film camera. That metric, frames of celluloid film, has no meaning once you have digital imaging technology. It becomes an irrelevant metric, and you need a new metric or multiple new metrics in order to understand imaging as a new system with new capabilities, new possibilities, and then, of course, new products and new business models built around that new technology. It will be the same for the disruption of labor. We are right now focused on the metric of jobs when it comes to understanding labor, because that's how we organize most human activity, most human work, certainly most transactional human productive activity in the formal economy is done under the organizational rubric of a job. But a job is more than just the performance of specific tasks. Jobs involve contracts and relationships between employers and employees. They involve rights and responsibilities. They form part of an individual's identity. They can be part of your cultural affiliation, your history and your family and your heritage and your community. Jobs are a bigger metric. They are a bigger thing than just a task that a task that you might want to accomplish. So jobs typically involve the performance of many different tasks and taking responsibility even for the performance of new tasks if they turn out to be required in a certain circumstance. Okay, does any of that make sense for humanoid robotics? Not so
No.
much, right? Probably what we are suggesting is that probably the at the very least, at the most basic level, the task is the relevant unit of analysis, not the job. And so I think this is about anticipating a mistake, a misunderstanding that's likely to come. The idea that humanoid robots are going to take jobs and take them on a one-to-one basis. So a humanoid robot will come along and it will take one human worker's job. That is very unlikely to be the case. What is much more likely to be the case is that humanoid robots will perform tasks that are currently performed by humans as part of their job. And that has significant implications for how we think about this. So, yeah, that insight is mostly about get your unit
Okay.
of analysis right, and jobs are not the
Mhm.
right unit of analysis for understanding this disruption of labor.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Another very powerful principle. I need to think on that, but I think you've just made me, just blew my mind a little bit. On the other side, though, a humanoid bot can do many different kind of tasks. So you don't need to hire a plumber, you don't need to hire a chef, you don't need to hire, all these other jobs that people did, because one bot could possibly do certain tasks for each of those. I think it's important for us
It,
as we're talking about labor that this is the single largest economy market out there, right? 44 trillion, which is 50% of the global GDP. And it is like 10 times larger than the automotive market, for example. It is that big. I think if you could put some numbers around that, if you can.
well, the global labor market is it's so large. It's so large that and all encompassing, and it is such a fundamental input into every other market via every supply chain
Mhm.
that in
Mhm.
some ways thinking in terms of a or the labor market is misleading.
Mhm.
Um, and GDP has its flaws. You know, there are problems with the way. I mean, GDP is sort of a necessary um, tool for making sense of the scale of productive activity on the planet and within any nation, but it isn't a perfect measure in and of itself. And so I think that we are going to need new measures, new tools. Something like GDP could easily become an obsolete metric quite quickly if productive activity can happen in a way that isn't necessarily legible or visible to the way we normally look at transactional relationships, trade in the global economy. If, for example, work gets done that nobody's collecting a paycheck for, that's invisible in some ways to GDP. And hence we have a large informal economy that GDP doesn't capture already. Human beings do a lot of productive things that are not visible to GDP. A lot of very important things, a lot of work, a lot of productive activity that happens in the home, for example, is not visible. It's not tracked by GDP. I think that humanoid robots are very likely to deepen um, uh, that issue rather than the reverse. So this is going. This is again. I struggle to put into words. It's almost impossible to overstate how radical this transformation is going to be. It is going to change the rules of economics fundamentally. It's going to change how we think about what an economy is.
Mhm.
Um, and so this is just a massive challenge for us looking forward. There's a huge amount of work and to do and understanding to build. But yeah, the I think at the most fundamental level, um, every task that's performed in the global economy by anyone who has a job in the global economy is to a greater or lesser extent in the crosshairs of this disruption. And well, I mean, that is both one of the most extraordinary opportunities in human history and also potentially
Mhm.
a source of tumult, chaos. Um, and if we are not very careful, there could be a lot of collateral damage along the way as this disruption unfolds. Yeah, so this
Okay.
is if you want to talk about a big deal, deals don't get any bigger than this.
This is it. Okay. You've done a good job. Okay. So let's review. You said that the humanoid robot labor is inevitable. Disruption is going to create an entirely new labor system. You explained that. And it's going to be about tasks, not jobs. So let's get to the next three. All products and services will get cheaper. All products will get better. Productivity is going to skyrocket. This sounds utopian to me. It's possible. That at least that's one option, is that can be utopia.
Well, I mean, we know that the just on the bare facts on the face of it are pretty plain to see. If labor as an input into any value creation process, any productive activity, whether it's visible or not visible to the global economy, any labor input into a value creation, that becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over time, will have a domino effect, a snowball effect that cascades through the entire global economy, right? This is just inevitable. If labor is an input into everything and it gets cheaper, then everything else will get cheaper too. Everything. No exceptions, not really. I mean, if labor is part of the cost of any good and service and that cost goes down, then the total cost, not the price necessarily, price and cost are not
Mhm.
the same, but the
Right.
cost to produce, the cost to create value will fall. And that means we will be able to do more value creation. It will be more value will be more accessible to more people more of the time. Now, there is a sense in which that's the first order result of that. The first causal result of that is it's a good thing. There could be second order and third order and higher order consequences that are not positive, right? If this throws society into chaos and creates civil unrest and so forth, then there could be a lot of harm alongside the good that could come of being able to create more value and have greater prosperity as a result of that. But there's simply no question that if this can drive the cost of labor down by a big amount, then we are going to be able to create more, to build more, to distribute more, to uh, uh, prosper more than we do today. And that's something that's definitely worth getting excited about. Um, the the quality improvement is maybe a more subtle, not quite so self-evident um, uh, result, but I think it's important nevertheless. Right now, if you think about the range of products that are available, so imagine look around you in your whatever room that you're in, look at the objects that are around, and you can imagine quite easily. Well, there are some things that are lower quality and some things that are higher quality. There's there's the proverbial cheap junk and there's proverbial premium high quality goods, right? Why is stuff cheap junk instead of premium? Well, a lot of that has to do with the cost of getting high quality human labor, right? It is easier to make cheap junk. Because cheap junk, lower quality stuff that's produced to not as high of a standard, not in terms of precision or consistency or fit or attention to detail. These are all of them the result of human limitations, right? Limitations on human skill, limitations on human diligence, limitations on human attention and focus to detail. Whenever we look at a master craftsman, for example, in a traditional industry, we're often captivated by the exquisite attention to detail and the incredible skill that's on display. But the thing to remember is that those are human qualities. They're artifacts of human nature. Robots will not have those. A humanoid robot will perform every action as well as it can perform it every single time. It will not be distracted. It won't have a bad day. It will not come in hungover or ill to work. It's going to perform at a consistent level of quality, and the result will be consistent. And so there will not be a cost differential between production at the best level you can achieve or a lower level of quality. And because of that, I think what we're likely to see is a narrowing of the gap between low end and
Mhm.
high end uh, goods in terms of just their quality. Now, that only explains part of it. The quality of materials that are input into a product that's high end versus low end is another major factor of what's going on there. But ultimately, the thing to understand, the thing to recognize at this point is that the quality of goods, of products in our lives is to a substantial extent determined by human limitations. And robots don't have the same limitations that human beings have. And that has important implications. I think it's quite an exciting one that the gap between premium and low end products will close. Um, if you combine that with the fact that everything is going to be getting cheaper, then the material difference between the cost of a premium and a low end product will become less significant, right? The difference, if something costs $100 versus $50, that's a big difference. If something costs 99 cents versus 98 cents, that's not all that big of a difference. So if we both close both the gap and shrink the absolute quantity of cost differential between a low end and high end product, the demand for low end products will evaporate, right? And so these are the reasons to expect uh, a broad across the board increase in quality of goods and services.
Yep. Oh, wonderfully said. Thank you. So there's an explosion of humanoid bot companies out there lots of reasons. It's going to be very lucrative, as you've been talking about, but also it's very critical for productivity. And I've interviewed quite a number of CEOs of humanoid bot companies as well as human scale bot companies, which we've referred to just other kinds of intelligent bots that are not the industrial robots kind. And Tesla, of course, is one of the leaders. You can see it in their manufacturing design of their Gen 2 Optimus bot. You can see it in their AI and the intelligence they can put in there. They've got the data warehouse, they've got the billions of dollars they're spending on that, and they've got the manufacturing factories to do this. And this has now, this is your Insight 7 and 8, which we'll cover. This is more than just a private company creating a product. This is a national interest. We have seen China come out and announce about 6 months ago that they intend to be the leader in humanoid robots by 2027, and that they want to have the most in scale production by 2 years from now. So this is something that the China has already stepped up, even announced that this is critical for their national interest. We've not heard the US do this, and yet they're doing the opposite. They're actually kind of hindering and attacking Elon Musk and the efforts. But this notion that the development of humanoid bots, and there's a number of them. Like I said, there's explosion of humanoid bot companies out there, and they're all doing their best. They need funding, they need support, and yet we're seeing the opposite. So you say here in Insight 7, investing in humanoid robots is now a matter of national interest. This isn't just corporations, this is national interest. And Insight 8, national mobilization and enormous investments in humanoid robots are now justified. There's no time to lose. Do you want to speak to this?
Absolutely. The countries, nations have always competed with one another, and they've competed with one another economically. And in the past, what the factors that constrained the growth of a nation's economy were land, labor, capital, not and human capital, knowledge, and uh, now what we're seeing is an opportunity for one of, if perhaps not the most fundamental constraint on the growth of an economy, labor as a factor of production. That is going to cease to be a constraint in the way that it always has been. And again, this is totally transformational and utterly profound. In the past, because labor is an input into every good and service, because labor has been limited to how many skilled adults in your society were able to perform labor, it put a hard limit on what your economy's output could be and how fast your economy could grow, right? But that constraint gets blown apart completely by AI and humanoid, especially humanoid, but AI and robotics in general, and especially humanoid robotics. For the first time, we will be able to grow labor as a factor of production uh, at not at the rate at which the population of humans can increase, which is very slow, right? It takes 20 years or so for a human to go from being born to becoming a skilled adult contributing to the national labor market, right? And it's costly too. I mean,
Mhm.
if anybody who's a parent knows that it's expensive.
Mhm.
Um, so there's very high cost, and it takes a long time. And that's one of your options to grow your population the old-fashioned way, let's say. Immigration is another, although that's a zero-sum game, because what you gain, the country that from which people are emigrating is losing. But for the first time, we are going to be able to do it completely differently. The labor, and thus the foundational limit on the scale of an economy, will be subject not to population and immigration as the constraining fact, as the determining limits, but instead, how fast can you build and deploy robots? That is
Mhm.
going to become the new measure by which you constrain the new limit, the new limiting factor on your economic growth. And it's not very limiting. I mean, this is the thing that's extraordinary. We're not talking
Mhm.
about single digit percentage points of increase here. We're talking on a time scale of perhaps 2 decades, being able to multiply
Mhm.
the productivity, the labor available to a national economy. So not, a 10% or 20% or 30% increase, which would be pretty extraordinary,
Yeah.
especially when GDP, where we get excited by 1% more GDP growth per year than a
Right.
previous year. That's a big deal. But what if you had multiples, 100, 200,
Mhm.
500, a thousand
Wow.
percent more productivity, right?
Oh God.
Again, it's difficult. It's difficult to overstate how extraordinary this transformation has the potential to be. We can manufacture our labor force now, and then the limits on the economy just explode as a consequence of that. So,
That's
what are the
amazing.
implications of that if you onboard that fact into your reasoning? What are the implications for policymaking and investment? Well, it's certainly a race to the top now. The race is on, and uh, perhaps countries that in the past have seldom been in the pole position, seldom been in
Mhm.
leadership, could leapfrog into the position of leadership if they choose to make aggressive investments now. Huge investments are obviously warranted. I mean, uh, if you can on a 10-year time horizon double or triple or quadruple the scale of your entire economy, what would you invest in order to achieve that as a policymaker? What
Yeah.
scale of investment would be justified? A staggeringly enormous scale
And
of investment would be justified.
it's the
And this is
opposite too,
just
right?
on raw economic terms. I mean, there are other factors to consider as well. National security, national independence, national resilience. These are all factors to consider that having a greater pool of labor to draw upon would give you. And so their incentive is now overwhelming to build productive capacity in the form of humanoid robots, uh, almost like nothing we've ever seen, or with few precedents. The closest analogs that I can think of are the massive investments that we've made in the past in enabling infrastructure. So we spent a huge amount in,
Mhm.
I say we, human civilization, most countries spent enormous resources, justifiably, on deploying electricity infrastructure, deploying plumbing and running water and sanitation infrastructure, deploying transportation, building roads. It was worth it to spend a sizable fraction of GDP creating the enabling conditions, because that infrastructure helped us be so productive. It helped us.
Mhm.
It helped support prosperity in so many ways. Well, this is all of that just dial up to another level, right?
Oh,
It's
okay.
so it that is the way to think about it.
Yeah. And it's the other way around too. If you're not the one doing it, then the other countries do it ahead of you. What are you gonna look like, right?
Right.
So
Right.
let's take a look at 910. Let's move on. The disruption of labor accelerates the other foundational disruptions of energy, transportation, and food. It accelerates them. So even just yeah, all that is going to be so much better. And humanoid robotics will massively increase prosperity, therefore make every major social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental problem more solvable. Wow. This is your life's work. What you guys have been working towards, this is, like you said, the foundation to energy, transportation, food, social, economic, geopolitical, environmental issues.
Well, so there's the logic of these dynamics is inescapable. The disruptions will reinforce, amplify, accelerate one another. That is incontrovertible in my mind. They all feed into one another. Each of these are foundational, which means that the goods and services that come out of the energy sector, the transportation sector, the food sector, the labor sector, they are in turn inputs into everything else, including one another. And so there's very clearly a flywheel that gets spun up as these are all mutually accelerating. What is less an inevitability and very much more a possibility, depending on our choices that we make, and it is a choice, is whether we use the extraordinary increase in our productive capacity to realize prosperity and then direct that prosperity towards the solving of problems, the meeting of challenges of all different kinds, social, political, economic, environmental, right? We have the world's full of problems. So we have a lot of work to do. The world's extraordinary today. Our ancestors thousands of years ago would already believe, if they saw, that we live like gods. But the fact is that life is terribly difficult for millions of people to an unconscionable degree. As prosperous as humanity is already, we have a long way to go, and we could take huge leaps and bounds towards greater prosperity for everyone with the aid of these technologies, and perhaps especially with the disruption of labor. But it will be a choice. It will come down to the choices that we at every level make, individuals, communities, entire nations, the international community. It will come down to the choices that we make about whether or not we realize that prosperity, whether that prosperity is shared and accessible widely, and whether that prosperity is then utilized, deployed in a way that solves problems. So the possibilities are there in a way that they never were before. We can have a degree of prosperity that frankly would have seemed unimaginable 15 or 20 years ago to someone not paying very close attention and not already quite conversant in understanding technology and disruptions. It would have seemed just impossible. It's just silly science fiction that laid 500 years away or something like that.
Just hope we don't screw it up.
Right. I mean, the stakes are high here. But the possibilities are there. The possibilities are there. And this is what we have to grapple with. This is the great challenge of our time, is seize this as an opportunity and make good choices. And there are some guiding principles that we can implement. We need to learn quickly. We need to have experiments. We need to be open-minded. We need to recognize that in any tumultuous time when a lot is changing, it pays to be open to experimentation and failure, and to not punish or condemn failure, but to celebrate that as an opportunity to learn and to look not only inward and reflect on one's own successes and failures, but to look to others and try to learn from the examples that you see around you. And if we extend that to a planetary scale, every community, every society should be looking to its neighbors and its friends and even its adversaries 4 examples to learn from, both of what to do and what not to do. We have a huge amount of work ahead of us, but the possibilities are there. The possibilities are there for prosperity
Nice.
that is difficult to imagine from our current
Mhm.
standpoint.
All right, that's 11 and 12. These are powerful insights. And like you and I have talked about, we'll go through the all 15 today, and then we'll do more deep dives in the future. The technology convergence of the humanoid robot labor engine is happening now. Manufacturability is critical. The humanoid form factor is going to dominate robotics applications for at least the next decade.
Right. So if you think historically, one of the most extraordinary uh, past disruptions of human labor was when engines were created.
Mhm. Yeah.
So uh, prior to the advent, there was a convergence of technologies that led to the advent of engines. Metallurgy, fuels, chemistry, a number of different technologies all came together to make engines possible. Prior to engines, combustion engines are the main ones to think about, um, and they certainly became dominant. And we could include perhaps electric motors in this category, but think in terms of engines. Prior to engines, force came from muscles.
Mhm.
Human and animal power is what powered the world. It's what powered civilization for centuries before engines. And then engines changed everything. They allowed us to direct massively more force than we ever had before, to employ um, force and power at orders of magnitude more than were ever possible with muscles. And this was transformative. We're looking at a similar kind of transformation today. So that's why we are using this phrase, the labor engine. It's like a new. Uh, it's a transformation of a similar
Mhm.
quality and magnitude to what we saw with the original disruption caused by engines. And our future work will build on that as an idea. This is you can think of it as a little bit of a teaser idea.
Mhm.
As for manufacturability, absolutely. Um, the determinant in this race to the top that we're now in to the disruption of labor will be how fast can you build and deploy humanoid robots. And a key determining uh, factor there will be the manufacturability of those robots. So, uh, if a humanoid robot is designed to be manufacturable, that will represent a very important competitive advantage over a robot that might perform better or a robot that might even be cheaper, but that's more difficult to manufacture at scale, en masse. And so we think that the manufacturability metric, that criterion, is one to pay very close attention to, because the scale, speed, and scale of deployment is going to determine the front runners and the winners in race, this race to the top.
Yeah.
So that's why we think
Mhm.
manufacturability is so important. Um, uh, uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was just gonna,
and
yeah,
well, go ahead.
that's why Tesla is one of the, important companies you need to watch out for, because that is what they're designed for. That is what their special skills are and assets that they already have. Yeah. So number 12 is the humanoid form factor is going to dominate robotics applications.
I think there are a number of reasons to expect this. The humanoid form factor. I mean, the human form, humans, and the human form is already demonstrably a an excellent general purpose platform for being productive. Right? Humans are pretty good generalists already, as a tool using structure, a physical tool using platform. This bipedal form is pretty good. Now, it's conceivable that there are better ones. It's conceivable that a form on wheels, or a more, say, for example, something resembling a crab, an arthropod style form, might be more optimal, sort of fundamentally, as a general purpose platform. But Humans have already shown that the human form isn't bad. Beyond that, the built world, all of the systems that currently exist have been designed around the human form, so that's a natural fit. The human form is familiar to us, of course. That's a tautology to say that, and so there's a sense in which creating robots that are in this familiar form is other things being equal, a better choice, better to deploy at scale a platform that is of a familiar form rather than an unfamiliar or frightening or alien or confusing form. So those are all factors that contribute. And then beyond that, there's value to a general purpose form overall. So the not only will the humanoid form likely dominate in the near term, but general purpose robotics are likely to they're likely to see an enormous amount of value in their utilization compared to specialized forms because of the much greater redeployability of robots compared to human beings. So this is where if we bring in our human assumptions, they can be misleading. Right now,
Hmm.
it's difficult to redeploy a human being, right? For a human being to acquire the new skills that are necessary to perform new tasks in a new environment, that's time consuming. It's difficult. It's expensive. It can be dangerous. And so, right
Hmm.
now, humans specialize because the cost of transfer, the cost of redeployment is high. And it's high on every level. For bots, there's very little cost if you're a general purpose platform. Your new skills are they're just a download away, right? And redeployment can happen literally overnight. I mean, a robot could work in a factory one day, a restaurant the next day, a warehouse the next day, and the battlefield the day after that, right? Human beings cannot do that, and it's easy to forget that that's a bias that we ought not to impose on robots. We need to again think from the first principles up and check our assumptions there. What that spells is a probably an unintuitively large value to generality for robotics. Now, that's not to say specialization won't have its uses. Specialization will. Specialization will be important in certain key applications. There will be niche uses where specialization is the only option. It will be mandatory. But I think that because of the ease of redeployment, transferability, reskilling robots compared to humans, the general purpose form, of which humanoid is pretty good already, is going to prove to be very valuable.
Yeah.
So that's among other things, among other reasons. Those are some as to why we are imagining, at least for the first decade, the bulk of the growth, the bulk of the deployment will be in the form of humanoid robots, and not, for example, in some of uh, uh, the other forms that we've seen.
Wow. Okay. So there's just so much that can be done with generalized tasks and things that the human or robot can do, the human form. Let's talk about the next few insights that you've presented here. Insight 13, autocatalysis. You explained that to me a little bit earlier. Humanoid robot production. Humanoid, the actual production of the human or robot itself could actually help make even more humanoid robots, will be the key to the success of both individual firms and national economies. That goes back into what you said about manufacturability. Technological unemployment remains inevitable, but latent demand for labor will be met first, creating a crucial planning window for a soft landing. Nice. I love that. I hope you're right. Tell us more.
So uh, for this first of these insights,
Yeah.
uh, autocatalysis, this self acceleration, because catalysis comes from the word catalyst, to enable or to accelerate something. When you're self-accelerating, that can spin up a flywheel of growth, and an exponential trajectory is likely to be the result of that. Now, if you're in a race, you want to look for opportunities to accelerate your processes. And so the self-acceleration, in other words, the manufacture of robots, using robots themselves as an input, as an accelerant, as a catalyst, is a logical choice there. And industries that avail themselves of that, nations, national economies that avail themselves of that sooner rather than later, will spin up the flywheel faster, and they'll race up that exponential trajectory faster. And if the goal is to grow as fast as possible, which it will be because this is race conditions, then autocatalysis is going to be one of the keys to success here. The next insight that we discussed in our piece about which kinds of demand are likely to be met first, I think this is very important. So we know, just as a fact about national economies, the global economy at large, that there's a shortage of labor in principle. This is just a fact of any economy. There's always more work we wish could be done than is available to be done by the workforce. And this is for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's a coordination problem. Workers are looking for jobs and employers are looking for workers, but they can't find one another, even if they would agree to enter into a job, enter into a contract, enter into a trade, an exchange of labor for payment, if they could find one another. So there's friction. It's not a perfectly frictionless transaction process. Beyond that, there's latent demand. That employers or even outside the formal economy, we would all wish would get done. There's work that we wish would get done, could be done, that somebody would do, but that nobody is willing to do because the terms of that employment, that the terms of engaging in a transaction there are not attractive enough. In other words, the work nobody's willing to pay enough for it, or whatever people are willing to pay isn't enough for anybody to be willing to do it. Some jobs are too dirty. Some tasks are just not valuable enough. They would be too low paying at the equilibrium price in a market negotiating supply and demand. Okay, what does that mean for robotics? Well, suddenly you have a way to perform labor that's very, very low cost, that's faster transactionally, right? There's less friction. You can match more quickly because you're not talking about hiring somebody for a job. You're talking about identifying tasks that need to be performed and then a pool of general labor that's able to perform tasks. So there's less transactional friction. And the tasks that can be performed are as the marginal cost, as the cost of labor falls at the margin, as it declines, more and more of that latent demand that can't be met today with human labor will be able to be met with robotic labor, with humanoid robots. What does that mean? It means that in the near term, humanoid robots have this massive pool of unmet demand that they can be deployed to meet, and that will be fantastic. This will be enormously beneficial. It will increase productivity, and it will create, in the short term, a potentially misleading, a potentially false conception that robots are only a force multiplier. They are only going to add rather than compete with or displace human workers. Because in the beginning, the robotic labor can target labor shortages and latent demand that isn't being met right now. Now, that's a potentially quite a dangerous situation because we could get lulled into a false sense of security. Wow, millions of these bots have gone out, and it turns out they aren't putting people out of work. They're being deployed alongside human beings and enhancing their productivity, and they're making us more productive. We're seeing that line being sold to us already by some luminaries in the tech space, in the AI and other arenas. Oh, these tools, don't worry, they're not a threat to occupations, to jobs, to employees. They are only going to make you more productive. They're not going to take your job, they're going to make you a super employee. Well, okay, maybe in the short term, that's true. And if it is true, and there's reason to believe that it is, that gives us a window of opportunity to prepare for the day, not far in the future, where it won't be true.
Mhm.
And humanoid robots will begin inevitably displacing workers from their jobs, because they will increasingly be able to do all of the tasks that a human can do, and better and more consistently, and as we've discussed, for much, much, much cheaper.
Nice.
So their technological employment remains inevitable. We have to face that reality, even if the initial data come in and tell us, well, these robots aren't displacing people. They will. And we have to realize this creates a window of opportunity to plan for a softer landing than we would might
Nice.
otherwise expect to have.
Yeah. I like that very much. Okay. This next insight is I think very important, which is this notion that, people keep thinking there's a competition, that all these robotics companies, they're going to compete with each other. But I'm glad that you actually agreed and you say this, which is that, demand for labor is so great and varied that many different firms will thrive simultaneously in the early years of the disruption. Now, that's not to say that there's going to be an explosion of both humanoid and human scale bot companies. There's going to be thousands and hundreds that will die. That doesn't mean that they won't die, but there will be many that will succeed. And there's like many different variations. And then I love this last point you said, which is, this is kind of like a hint. If you're a, nation, government, city, you want to protect the people. It's not the jobs, the firms or industries you should be protecting. It's the people.
Right.
This is a very good point.
Right. This is the most important takeaway of all. So yes, the final insight there is an important one. It's about the diversity to expect in the industry that manufactures and deploys robotics, and it's an important one. Absolutely true. Certainly, in the short term, the demand will be so large that there's room for many. Even if there are clear leaders, even if there's a clear leaderboard, the demand will be so large, and especially in the early days when supply can't meet all of demand, that there's going to be plenty of opportunity for a lot of competition from a lot of different business models. So if the very best robots for value for money, they're very cheap and they're really high quality, they're really capable, but there just aren't enough of them to go around. If those are only available for lease, and you can't get your hands on one, you're still going to go to a lower quality robot that maybe isn't quite as affordable, but you're still going to want it. And so there's room there for a robust ecosystem of manufacturers to create a diverse supply built on a wide range of business models. Okay. The last point deserves a lot of stress. It's why we end with it, and it's in bold, and this is something that we've stressed throughout all of our work, and it applies every bit as much, if not more, in the case of this disruption. And that is, if you are a policymaker or a leader or a decision maker in any capacity, your foremost responsibility is to protect people. So this is what we ought to expect of our governments, for example, to protect people affected by this disruption, not to protect industries or to protect just shareholders or to protect other incumbent interests, for example. That won't cut it. That won't do the job. And we've seen that fail in the past, right? And society got there was turmoil as a result. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, banks were bailed out, but homeowners weren't in the housing crisis. So the government protected the industries, but didn't protect the actual people affected by them. Similarly, if you prop up a failing industry, then you're going to you're going to create the illusion that that will protect the workers in that industry, but it won't succeed. And this is where you get discouraging situations like um, golden parachutes for the leadership of a sinking industry that's being disrupted, and the workers are made empty promises and ultimately lose their livelihoods as a result of the inevitable disruption. And the government's actions don't serve the interests of people; they serve the interest only of select narrow groups, and that is, well, in any industry, it's undesirable. In any case, it's not optimal. But for this disruption, which is going to be so large, which is going to affect the majority of people in a society, we must do a better job of taking that advice, taking that thinking, adopting that principle, taking it to heart. Protect people. Don't focus on bailing out industries. Don't protect
Mhm.
the incumbent interests. Figure out how to make this disruption work for society as a whole, for everyone, for all people. And uh, that is the way that we avoid the dystopia that you mentioned, and we make the future something closer, not perfect, but something closer to the the utopia, the optimal, the optimistic outcome that is possible based on the disruption of
Mhm.
labor. So
Thank you.
that is the if we leave anyone with a final thought, that's got to be it. Protect people, not the industries that will be disrupted.
So Elon and Tesla just dropped a new demo of the Tesla bot Gen 2. They showed 12 these Gen 2s in the lab. They talked about the Tesla bot is now going to be, it currently is in a factory now, in still test and pilot, but they expect it to actually be a useful work by the end of this year. And then we were talking about how many bots will they be making. And Elon did say that he expects, if everything goes well, that they'll actually be selling these bots to customers next year. This post was made by a Twitter, an ex user called Smokeaway. And he said, this is my expectation, right? Optimus production ramp, 1,000 2024, 1 million 2027, and 1 billion in 2030. And what's interesting about this was Elon Musk said, not quite that fast, but not far wrong. We're talking about a million by 2027, 1,000 now. That's 1,000 this year, 10,000 next year, and then a million, and then a billion. What's your thoughts about this potential for Tesla bot and what Elon Musk just said?
Well, I think the dynamics that are operative in this case are so extraordinary that we might see more than just just exponential growth. We might actually see double exponential growth, in the sense that this common error of overestimating what's possible in the short term, but underestimating what's possible in the long term by thinking linearly. This could apply to regular exponential thinking today. This is such an extraordinary situation. So if you apply normal exponential thinking, you could still overestimate the short term, but underestimate the long term. In other words, uh, okay, maybe we're not in the millions within several years, but by the mid 2030s, could we be into the tens of billions of humanoid robots being deployed? Certainly, not impossible. And one way to look to an existing proof for that fact is look at what happened with smartphones. Look at what happened with smartphones. Right, the iPhone comes out in 2007. When do we hit the billion smartphone mark? And it wasn't 20 years later. So it was single digit years. So I think what we're going to see is a scale of deployment driven by a scale of demand, that will look more like the smartphone than, say, for example, even the automobile. And there's plenty of demand for an automobile, or for automobiles. So we've seen this kind of absolutely explosive growth in the past, and all of the dynamics, all of the incentives, all of the demand pressures, all of the value that's on offer, all the stakes are there, and then some in this case. So I can easily see millions by the end of the decade, and then billions by the end of the 2030s, is as the quantities of production that we're talking about here. It could very likely will dwarf most, if not all, other manufacturing industries ever. Seems to me that that's quite easily a possibility. So yeah, I think we underestimate the tsunami that's coming at our peril.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was very powerful. I mean, you guys are probably the most complete, the most in-depth, and like you said earlier, you actually have the most, you base it on past, you study this. This is your thing about disruption, and you're watching this all develop. Now, I thank you so much for doing so much work here. And this was very exciting. I mean, there were several insights there that I thought was something that people haven't been talking about, thinking about. Very important. And as you and I have discussed offline, this is the biggest, most impactful event that's ever happened, and likely in human history, maybe bigger than AI, bigger than internet. And then I don't know about the fire one, but it could turn out to be equivalent or something like that, right? That'd be cool. Thank you so much, Adam. So follow him on X at Adam_Dorr, DORR. You could find him on YouTube at ReThinkX, and of course their website as well. And he's also written a book called Brighter Book, which is, Brighter with Herbert. This is his name as well, Brighter Book, at Amazon. Check him out. Thank you so much, Adam. Appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.